My players opened the door, and there stood two tall, green-skinned, gangly creatures with fangs, claws, and eyes that gleamed with malice. These two monsters loomed over three tied-up prisoners, dark elves, and my players did not hesitate. They rushed in to confront these monstrosities. After all, there were only two of them. As the battle broke out, adjacent doors opened, and two more of these creatures emerged, making the total four. Four big nasties, but it was okay. They were doing okay. That is, until they realized the monsters were regenerating hit points every round. That's when things started to go south. This combat, which was only of moderate difficulty according to the math, proceeded to take us 5 hours to resolve. Now, I think there were 3 contributing factors to it taking this long. First, these monsters seemed to punch a tad above their weight limit, and they were focusing fire on the frontliners, and characters started dropping in the second round of combat. Once that began, all crap hit the fan, as it usually does when PCs start going down. Next, when the monsters got low on health, I had them make tactical retreats behind closed doors where they could regenerate back to full health, and then they would return to attack. This dynamic shifting battle drew things out even longer, as it gave time for both sides to recover before going back into the ring. However, the third contributing factor was that my players were unable to overcome the creature's regeneration. They kept healing for 20 hit points every round, and that nearly kept up with my players' damage output. So things just dragged on and on. Now, I bet that you probably instantly recognized what these creatures were, right? In the very first few sentences that opened this video, you knew they were trolls. And then once I mentioned the regeneration, there was absolutely no doubt. Trolls. Filthy trolls. Furthermore, you knew that using fire was the key to stopping their regeneration. You may have already left a comment or two to that effect. I mean, how dumb were my players that they didn't try using fire on something that was obviously a troll? But here's the thing, my players all knew these were trolls. From the moment I described them, they all knew they were trolls and often called them trolls as they were playing the game. And I never mentioned the word troll, ever. I would call them hulking monstrosities or monsters or whatever. And my players, of course, all knew that fire probably overcame their regeneration. My players are experienced gamers and they're very smart to boot. So what gives? Why didn't they just use fire? Because they were role-playing, of course. Their characters didn't know these were trolls and that fire would stop their regeneration. So because this is a role-playing game and the point is to role-play one's character, they were doing their darndest to not metagame. Shoot, they even had a goblin wizard, Krabby, in the group who loves fire spells. In fact, his constant refrain in the game is, "Krabby burn! Krabby burn, burn!" Eventually, of course, my players discovered that acid would also stop their regeneration, and they began casting acid arrows. But they only had so many of those. Then, finally, they lit a torch, used some oil, and started burning their way through the trolls. Now, a 5-hour battle is a bit crazy, but interestingly enough, it was tons of fun. The constant shifting tide of battle and circumstances kept all of us on the edge of our seats. Now, granted, having battles that long all the time would be a bit too much, but every so often it's a cool change of pace. By the way, this happened in my Thieves Abound Pathfinder 2 campaign. And if you want to watch the game sessions where that battle took place, you can do that over on my other YouTube channel. I post all our game sessions there. You'll want to watch the end of episode 18, that's where the battle begins, and then pretty much all of episode 19. I'll put links for that down below. Okay, so I bet you're asking yourself right about now what any of this has to do with the worst monster ever. The reason you clicked on this video in the first place. Am I trying to say that trolls are the worst monster ever? No, of course not. Trolls are great, perhaps cliched at this point, but they are still cool and a trope that I enjoy using. Here's the thing. The worst D&D or Pathfinder 2 or whatever system you're running monster is the one that your players see coming from a mile away. If your players are already familiar with a monster, usually due to game experience and just having meta, out of character knowledge of it, it presents two problems. First, there is nothing novel about it to your players. And second, since they have metagame knowledge of it, they will either use that knowledge to their advantage, to the detriment of role-playing, or they'll do their best to ignore it, which usually drags combat out, convoluting matters more than necessary. The bottom line is that using monsters your players already know about is suboptimal and should be avoided. However, if you take a known monster and tweak it just slightly, it can be a thing of beauty. This subverts expectations in a good way and gives them a twist, a surprise, and a challenge to be overcome. So in the rest of this video, we're gonna be blazing through 15 easy ways that you can tweak monsters to turn them into something your players won't expect. Now, many of these tweaks will increase the difficulty of the monsters, so just bear that in mind as you're planning your encounters. Now, before we jump in, if you haven't already backed our Lairs and Legends 2 Kickstarter, you're going to want to check out this definitive 5th edition resource anthology. Look, running awesome 5e games with in-depth lore, deadly traps, and terrifying monsters doesn't have to take hours of prep. Lairs and Legends 2 and Loot and Lore 2, look at these beautiful covers by the way, have everything you need to get up and playing fast. Furthermore, my team and I handcrafted everything in these books to make them as easy to use as possible. I truly believe that this anthology of Game Master resources will fuel your 5e games for years to come. These two massive books put a collection of everything you need to run amazing games at your fingertips. Over 30 adventures, 30 standalone encounters, more than 100 monsters, 6 new rule sets, traps, puzzles, and more. The books also come in these gorgeous limited edition alt covers that will never have another print run. They will only be available as part of this Kickstarter. So if you want to get your hands on over 600 pages of 5e resources that you can drag and drop into your games, click that link below and back our Lairs and Legends 2 Kickstarter today. Number 1, lean into the theme. My first piece of advice is to use the lore and theme of monsters to inform changes you make to them. Trolls regenerate, right? So something like growing extra arms or heads would make total sense, as would some trolls having wings. However, a troll that spits acid or breathes fire, given that those are the things that stop their regeneration, might not make sense. Number 2, decrease hit points, increase damage. Perhaps the number one mistake game masters often make when tweaking monsters is to increase their hit points. Do not do this, please. Like, never do this. I don't know why I just started talking like that. It's because I'm weird, I don't know. Look, increasing hit points only makes combats take longer and turns them more into slogs. This is the last thing any D&D or Pathfinder 2 or Dungeon Crawl Classics or whatever game needs. Combats should be fast-paced and intense, not slow and boring. So instead, decrease hit points and increase damage. This will result in more exciting and tense combats that will probably be shorter instead of longer. This is what you want. Now, in many game systems, certainly in D&D 5e and Pathfinder 2, the difficulty of a monster is based on its defensive capabilities, that's hit points and armor class, and its offensive capabilities, that's the hit modifier and damage output. So a basic rule of thumb you can follow is to reduce hit points by half and double the damage output. This should mostly keep a monster at roughly the same difficulty or challenge rating as they began at. Number 3, add or change resistances and immunities. Okay, now we're getting into the tweaks that make monsters thematically different. Trolls are known for having rubbery hides, right? So why not make them resistant or even immune to bludgeoning damage? And that's any bludgeoning damage, magical or non-magical. As an aside, the mechanic in D&D 5e whereby monsters have resistance to non-magical damage is just silly. By the time monsters start having that resistance in the game, all the players have magic weapons or magic cantrips and spells. It's quite frankly something that almost never comes into play. I have no clue why the game designers even included it. It's de facto worthless as far as I can see. Number 4, Add a condition infliction to their attack. Inflicting conditions in combat can make things much more interesting. Now, Pathfinder 2 tends to do this a lot already, which is amazing. However, D&D 5e monsters often fall flat in this department. A troll that can rake your eyes with claws and blind you for the next round, well, that's a real problem, especially if you're a spellcaster. Or a troll that can kick your knees out, dropping you prone, and then grab your ankle, grappling you, and thus preventing you from standing up, well, that's terrifying. Number 5, add a special ability. When I give monsters special abilities, I either dream up something that sounds cool, or I base the special ability on a spell. A troll, for instance, might be able to spend 3 actions on its turn to bulge out a portion of its back and spit forth an egg sac. On the next round, that sac bursts and a juvenile troll emerges. The 2 trolls share hit points, so this comes at a cost, but they get twice as many attacks. Score. Score! Now, if you're basing a special ability on a spell, I would make sure that you implement it as an innate ability, not as actual spellcasting. This gets around the horrible game mechanic known as counterspell and ensures that your monsters don't just get shut down out of the gate. Number 6, change a special ability. Related to the previous point, but distinct, one way to overcome the issue of players using or trying to avoid out-of-character knowledge is to change special abilities, or resistances, immunities, and the like. The simple solution to Troll's regeneration that has been talked about on forums for decades is to make it so that some other element stops its regeneration instead of acid and fire. You might have ice trolls that are immune to fire. However, sonic or thunder damage blasts away their icy skin and stops them from healing. Number 7, increase DCs. Now this change is one often born out of necessity. I have found, especially in D&D 5e, but less so if at all in Pathfinder 2, that the DCs of some monsters' special abilities and spells are so low that characters almost never fail their saves. This especially happens when you are using a larger group of low CR creatures against higher level characters. So in this case, we bump the DCs so that they are meaningful. A quick rule of thumb is to increase the DC so that it has roughly a 60% to 70% chance of success. For D&D 5e, you'll have to do some quick math using your character's average saving throws. However, if you're running Pathfinder 2, this is easy. Just set the DC based on the DCs by level table on page 503 of the core rulebook. So if the PCs are level 7, I might make the DC 23. Done, done, and done. You see, this is the advantage of using a game system such as Pathfinder 2 where the math is tight and where the game designers published this information in the books for easy reference. Number 8, reskin it. You might argue that my first mistake in that encounter with trolls was describing them as tall, green-skinned, gangly creatures with fangs, claws, and eyes that gleam with malice. I mean, after a description like that, everyone and their sweet grandmas are going to know they're trolls. But what if I described them as hunchbacked, wrinkly skinned abominations with 4 legs and 2 heads? This is the classic method of reskinning. These trolls still use the stats of trolls, meaning that as a game master, you don't have to fiddle around with their stat blocks one bit, but they visually look like something else. This usually prevents your players from knowing anything about the creatures because it bypasses any out-of-character knowledge they might have. Just make sure you come up with a different name for the creatures for when the players ask you what those things are. They use like a knowledge check to get some information and whatnot. And also a name that you can call them by during the game, because you don't want trolls to inadvertently slip out, because then, well, the cat's out of the bag and you done screwed up. By the way, if you're finding this information useful, please give me a thumbs up and share this video with a fellow game master. Also, if you think I don't completely suck, why don't you leave a comment down below? Just let me know what an amazing scrubby beard I have, and that you can barely tell that I'm going bald right there. You can't, can you? Well, of course you can't. Number 9, never use the monster's name. Speaking of bypassing out-of-character knowledge and hitting on a point that I kind of already made, if you get into the habit of never saying the monster's name, trolls in this instance, then your players won't be able to instantly know what a creature is. Imagine that. Now, they might of course figure it out by gleaning clues from the creature's appearance, hence the reskinning, or by what it can do during combat, but it will take them a spell. and there will always be a bit of doubt and wondering. Number 10, make it cagey. This is something I like to do with bad guys from time to time, as it makes for a more interesting combat. In essence, you increase that troll's speed so that it can dash in, attack, and then move away out of range. You want to make that sucker cagey as all get on, so that players are busy trying to catch up with it, and also come up with tactics for pinning it down so they can fight against it more effectively. Now, if you're running D&D 5th edition, you probably also want to give the monster a pass-by attack so that it doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity when it moves away. And if you're a really cruel, cold-hearted GM, you'll give that monster an effective ranged attack too. Lean into the dark side, right? Imagine just shooting ranged attacks and then the players can never catch up with you. Beautiful, sweet chaos. Number 11, make it a spellcaster. What if one of our trolls could also cast spells? 4 regular trolls, and one in the back that is hurling webs or gobs of grease. My quick rule of thumb is to find a spellcaster stat block of the same challenge rating or difficulty as the base monster, and then just tack on its spell casting abilities. This should mostly not affect the base creature's difficulty. Mostly. Now, if you're running a spellcaster already, these are the tweaks you might want to make to it. First, increase its hit points if you're running D&D 5th edition. Spellcasters in 5th edition are extremely vulnerable to the surround impound, and even a super high level caster can die in a round or two if characters focus fire. Second, you need to have a way to overcome the dreaded counter spell. Let's face it, a spellcaster that can't cast spells is stupid and pointless. My preference is for players and game masters to simply agree not to use counterspell and thus shut each other down, de facto stopping them from playing the game. However, failing that, get sneaky. Make the spells innate abilities that can't be countered, or make them mechanical or alchemical effects. Of course, if you do that, effectively removing the possibility of the spells from being countered, you need to return the favor to your players and don't use counterspell on them. Seriously, no one benefits from counterspell being in the game. Number 12, give it stages. An enemy with stages is a tried and true game mechanic that gets used all the time in video games. So for our trolls, we would have something about them dynamically change at certain moments in the combat. They might curl up into a fetal position where their regeneration doubles. They might attack twice as often. They might pop out those juvenile troll egg sacs as a free action. They might grow in size, and the possibilities go on and on. Now, the triggers for these changes could be anything really, but hit point thresholds work really well for this. For example, when the troll drops to 50% health, the first change happens. Then at 25% health, the next change happens. Number 13, attack at a price. With this tweak, when characters attack a monster, they receive damage in return. Our troll's skin might be covered with large blisters filled with acid, and every time a character deals damage to the troll, several blisters pop, spraying everyone in 5 feet with acid. Of course, these particular trolls are immune to acid, or maybe they aren't, and desperate players might herd trolls together and burst their blisters with the purpose of spraying the other trolls to stop their regeneration. You see, you can do some really cool stuff with simple tweaks. Naturally, when doing this, make sure that there is a way to circumvent taking damage when the players attack such a monster. Often this is attacking at range, but there might be other methods as well. For instance, a character might make their attack with disadvantage or a -2 circumstance penalty to avoid popping the blisters. Number 14, give it a magic item. This approach totally makes sense if a magic item was going to be in the loot from a dungeon or group of creatures anyway. Simply have one of the monsters be using the magic item. This augments the monster's abilities and changes the dynamics of the encounter in a really cool way. 2 points of caution, however. First, avoid giving a monster a magic item you don't want the players to have. I mean, this may seem like common sense, but remember that once the troll dies, which is quite likely, the paladin will be able to scoop up that holy avenger. Second, don't forget to use the magic item in the encounter, which is something that I usually do. I mean, I have all these great ideas and then I totally forget about them. Number 15, supersize it. And no, we're not talking about McDonald's, even though, those French fries are so good, I swear. They like chemically alter those French fries and dip them into like an addictive substance. It's insane. Yeah, it's called sugar and fat. That's what the addictive substance is. Okay, so let's make the trolls larger or perhaps smaller. Now, this might affect their stat blocks or it might not, your choice. Thematically, it makes sense for a larger troll to hit harder, but perhaps move slower. Let's say it ate too many adventurers. And smaller trolls should be speedy little devils that swarm over characters one at a time, and perhaps try to force themselves down the character's mouth so they can claw them apart from the inside out. Implementation advice. I have 4 quick pieces of advice for how to implement changes like these in your game. First, inform players that there will be changes. Set expectations out of the gate. Let your players know that you routinely make changes to monsters' lore, stat blocks, and the like. Look, this may seem like it's a spoiler or something, but I've been in games where players freaked out when a shambling mound was different from the stat block in the book. When players know in advance that things will be changed, it helps avoid situations like that. Yes, you might argue that's a player problem, but isn't it part of the Game Master's role to smooth that sort of thing over? Number 2, leave breadcrumbs for new information. You might hint that a monster is different by its physical description or from clues the players can find elsewhere in the dungeon or adventure. The troll's lair might be filled with pits of bubbling acid, hinting that they are resistant or immune to acid. Or the trolls might live in the mouth of a volcano. Yep. Those trolls probably aren't bothered that much by fire, are they? Number 3, let players discover changes organically. Or you don't tell your players squat. Let them figure things out on their own accord when they run into a nasty troll surprise. Your choice. Either approach is valid, and doing a little bit of both is probably optimal. Number 4, change monsters from location to location. These lava trolls are immune to fire, but those ice trolls over there lose their regeneration when dealt bludgeoning damage. The trolls under the bridge regenerate when they submerge themselves in water, but not otherwise. There is nothing that says that trolls are trolls in your world. Except you, of course, because you're the game master, right? However, that's just what I think. What do you think? Let us know what adjustments you make to your monsters down in the comments. And don't forget to back Lairs and Legends 2 today. You don't want to miss out on this definitive 5e resource anthology. Now, if you'd like to learn about every dungeon master's worst nightmare, check out this video right here. And until next time, happy game mastering.